Read it again. Slowly this time, maybe your accent will sound less broken. Ethan Caldwell said without looking up from his desk, his voice cutting clean through the low hum of the classroom as a few heads lifted and then quickly lowered again. The fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, while Aaliyah Carter stood beside her chair with the paperback still open in her hands, her thumb pressing too hard against the page until it bent, a faint crease forming where she had stopped mid-sentence. And for a second she did not speak, not because she did not know the words, but because the room had shifted in that quiet, practiced way where no one moves but everyone is watching. A chair leg scraping softly somewhere in the back, a pen clicking twice and then stopping, the teacher glancing down at the attendance sheet instead of up at her, and Ethan leaned back just enough to stretch his legs into the aisle, his sneaker tapping once against the metal frame of her desk as if marking time. Waiting, while Aaliyah inhaled slowly through her nose, her shoulders tightening for half a beat before settling again. And when she started reading, her voice came out steady but lower, controlled, each word placed carefully into the space that had been left for her, not challenging, not shrinking, just continuing as if nothing had happened, even though the silence that followed carried the weight of it. The bell rang, but no one moved right away, chairs shifting a few inches, backpacks zipping halfway before stopping, as if the room needed a second to reset itself. And Aaliyah lowered her book carefully onto the desk, smoothing the bent corner with her thumb until it lay flat again, her eyes staying on the page a moment longer than necessary before she closed it and slid it into her bag with deliberate precision, aligning the edges against her binder like she always did, while a couple of students near the windows exchanged quick glances and then looked away when she stood, the scrape of her chair softer than the others as she pushed it in, slower too, like she was measuring the distance, and when she reached for her pen it slipped once against the desk surface before she caught it. A small, quiet misstep that made her pause for half a beat before continuing, tucking it into the side pocket without looking down again. And as the classroom began to loosen into movement, Ethan was already halfway turned toward his friends, one arm draped over the back of his chair, his voice low but carrying just enough to pull laughter from the row behind him, not directed at her now, not needing to be, and Aaliyah stepped into the aisle, adjusting the strap of her backpack higher on her shoulder, her fingers pressing briefly into the fabric as she moved past his desk without breaking stride, though her pace shifted slightly, just enough to avoid brushing against his shoes still angled into the walkway. And in the hallway the air felt cooler, the hum of lockers opening and closing replacing the fluorescent buzz, and she stopped at the nearest water fountain, pressing the button a second too late, so the stream arced unevenly before steadying, her hand hovering under it without drinking, just letting the water run for a moment before she released it, wiping her fingers against her sleeve, then turning toward her locker where she spun the dial once too far and had to reset, her shoulders tightening briefly before she tried again, this time slower, more exact, the metal door opening with a dull click, and inside everything was stacked neatly, textbooks aligned, loose papers clipped, a folded receipt tucked into the corner, and she slid her book in place, adjusting it twice until it matched the height of the others, while behind her footsteps passed, voices overlapping, a laugh rising and falling too quickly, and someone brushed past her shoulder without stopping, not hard, just enough to shift her balance a fraction, and she steadied herself against the locker edge before closing it, the sound firm but controlled, her hand lingering on the cool metal for a second before she let it drop and stepped back into the flow of the hallway, her posture straight, her pace even, as if she had always been moving like that. A cluster of students parted without being asked as Ethan stepped into the center of the hallway, his backpack slung loosely over one shoulder while a guy from the football team caught up beside him, already mid-sentence, lowering his voice just enough to match Ethan's pace, and someone else reached over to open a locker door for him before he even stopped walking, the metal clanging lightly as it swung wider than necessary, while a girl from the yearbook committee leaned in with a quick smile, holding out a clipboard that Ethan barely glanced at before scribbling his name across the bottom without breaking conversation, the pen handed back. Immediately, no pause, no question, and down the hall a teacher who had just been redirecting a group of freshmen shifted aside to let him pass first, her hand hovering mid-gesture before dropping as she offered a brief nod that went unanswered, and Aaliyah slowed near the corner, adjusting the strap of her bag again though it had not slipped, her eyes tracking the movement ahead without turning her head fully, her steps shortening for a moment as the flow of students bent subtly around him, then resuming once the space cleared. And when she reached the stairwell, she stopped at the top step to let a group come up, even though there was room to pass, her hand brushing the railing but not gripping it, her gaze lowering to the worn edges of the steps as if counting them, missing the first opening to move before stepping down on the second, her timing slightly off, and halfway down she shifted her notebook from one arm to the other, the pages pressing unevenly against the cover before. She straightened them with her thumb, smoothing the edge in a small, practiced motion, and at the bottom the hallway widened into the cafeteria entrance where a line had already formed, trays sliding forward in short increments. But when Ethan approached from the side, a staff member lifted the divider rope without being asked, gesturing him through with a quick, familiar smile, the line compressing instinctively to make space. A few students stepping back half a foot, others turning their bodies sideways to let him pass, and Aaliyah paused just outside the line, her hand hovering near the stack of trays before she picked one up a second later than the person ahead of her, the plastic edge tapping softly against the metal counter. And as she moved forward, she adjusted her grip once, then again, settling it against her palm more firmly, her eyes flicking briefly toward the side entrance where Ethan had already reached the register, his tray set down first, his total rung up without waiting, and she looked back to the menu board above the serving line, though she had already seen it, her focus lingering there a fraction too long before she stepped forward with the rest of the line, her posture straightening again as she matched their pace. The line edged forward in short, uneven steps, trays sliding across the metal rails with a soft scrape, and when Aaliyah reached the front, she kept her eyes on the counter, moving through the routine without pause, picking up a carton of milk, then setting it back down a fraction of an inch to align it with the edge of her tray before taking it again, her movements precise but just slightly delayed, as if recalibrating. And ahead, near the register, Ethan had already stepped aside, leaning one elbow on the counter while the cashier finished ringing him up. His receipt printed before the student behind him had even set down their tray, and as Aaliyah approached the same register, she placed her tray down carefully, sliding it forward until it met the scanner. But the total that flashed on the screen lingered a second longer than expected, the cashier hesitating, tapping the side of the register once before looking up briefly, then back down, and Aaliyah reached into her bag, fingers brushing past a folded envelope before stopping, her hand resting there for a beat too long, the line behind her compressing slightly, someone shifting their weight, a tray clinking against another, and she pulled out a small stack of bills, counting once, then again, one bill sticking momentarily to another before separating, her thumb pressing harder than needed, and just as she set the money down, she glanced at the screen again, her eyes narrowing slightly, then flicking toward the side, where Ethan stood, his tray already forgotten on a nearby table, his attention elsewhere, and for a brief second her hand hovered above the counter, not withdrawing, not moving forward, the cashier clearing their throats softly, waiting, and Aaliyah adjusted the edge of the receipt as it began to print, straightening it before it fully came out, then speaking quietly, her voice even but just a shade slower than before. I think the meal plan already covered this. The words landing flat in the space between them, not loud enough to carry far, but enough for the cashier to pause, their fingers hovering above the keys, and Ethan's head turned slightly at the sound, not fully, just enough to register the shift, his expression tightening a fraction as if something had interrupted the expected flow, and the student behind Aaliyah leaned to the side to see the screen, then leaned back again, the line holding still for a moment longer than it should have, before the cashier looked back at the display, pressing a button to check, the register beeping once, sharp and contained, while Aaliyah kept her hand steady on the counter, her posture upright but not rigid, waiting without stepping back. The cashier's fingers hovered over the keypad, then pressed another button, the register giving a short, uncertain beep that did not match the clean rhythm from earlier transactions, and the screen flickered once before settling on a different total, lower this time, but not zero, and the cashier glanced up again, longer now, their eyes moving between Aaliyah's face and the tray as if trying to decide which one to trust, while behind her the line shifted in a tighter wave, trays nudging Forward, a plastic cup tipping slightly and being caught at the last second, someone exhaling through their nose in a way that carried just enough to be heard. And Aaliyah kept her hand on the counter, fingers spread flat against the cool surface, the edge of the receipt brushing lightly against her knuckle as it finished printing, the thin paper curling at the end, and she did not pick it up yet, not immediately. Her eyes staying on the numbers as if waiting for them to change again, and from the side Ethan straightened just enough to step back toward the register, not fully returning to the line, but close enough that his presence filled the space. His shadow stretching across the counter under the overhead lights, and he did not speak right away, just looked at the screen, then at the cashier, then at Aaliyah, the order deliberate, controlled, his jaw tightening a fraction as if the delay itself was an inconvenience. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but it carried further. "It is not that complicated," he said, each word spaced evenly, not rushed, not raised. "You either have it or you do not." And the cashier's shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped, their hand moving back to the keypad as if to reset the transaction, but hesitating again halfway, waiting for a clearer signal, and Aaliyah's fingers pressed a little harder into the counter, the pad of her thumb flattening against the metal edge, then releasing, a small adjustment, and she reached for the receipt at last, pulling it free but not looking at it yet. Her grip just slightly uneven, so the paper bent once across the middle before. She straightened it, smoothing it with her other hand, her movements precise but not as fluid as before, and she set the cash she had counted earlier closer to the scanner, aligning the edges with a quick tap that came a fraction too sharp for the quiet around them. And the cashier glanced at the bills, then back at the screen, then at Aaliyah again, their lips parting as if to ask something, then closing without sound, and Ethan shifted his weight, one hand resting lightly on the counter now, fingers tapping once, not impatient, just present, and a student 2 places back leaned slightly to the side to see past the shoulder in front of them, then leaned back again when Ethan's gaze flicked briefly in that direction, not lingering, just enough to reset the boundary, and the cafeteria noise had not stopped, but it had thinned in this pocket, voices lowering a notch, trays moving more carefully, as if the line itself was holding its breath, and Aaliyah lifted her eyes from the counter to the cashier, then to the screen again, her focus narrowing, the corners of her mouth tightening just slightly before settling back into neutral, and she spoke again, quieter this time. "It should be covered." Not adding anything more, not explaining, just placing the statement into the space and letting it sit, and the cashier swallowed, nodding once without fully committing, their hand hovering above the override key, then pulling back, then hovering again, and from the side Ethan let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, something in between, and he straightened his posture, removing his hand from the counter only to place it back a few inches closer to the register, tightening the space, his presence more defined now. And when he spoke again, it was directed at the cashier, not at Aaliyah. "You are holding up the line," he said, still even, still controlled, but with a sharper edge under it, and the cashier's fingers moved quickly this time, pressing a sequence of keys, the register responding with a series of beeps that sounded almost too loud in the narrowed quiet, and the total shifted again, dropping to 0 for a split second before returning to the reduced amount, and the cashier froze, staring at the screen as if it had betrayed them, and Aaliyah's hand moved toward the cash, then stopped, hovering just above it, her fingers curling slightly as if reconsidering, then flattening again against the bills, and she slid them forward half an inch, then back again, a small, contained movement that did not commit to either choice. And the receipt in her other hand crinkled softly as her grip tightened without her noticing, and the student behind her shifted their weight from one foot to the other, the rubber sole of their sneakers squeaking faintly against the tile, and someone further back muttered something under their breath that did not fully form into words, and Ethan's gaze moved from the screen to Aaliyah again, steady, unblinking, not aggressive but firm, as if waiting for her to resolve the situation in a way that aligned with the order he expected. And the cashier looked between them once more, then down at the register, their finger hovering over the key that would finalize the transaction, their shoulders rising with a small inhale, and Aaliyah adjusted the position of her tray with her forearm, sliding it a fraction closer to the edge of the counter, the plastic base scraping softly, her movements careful, contained, and she lowered her hand back onto the bills, pressing them flat, then lifting them again just slightly, the edge catching on the counter before releasing, and she did not speak again. Not yet, the space stretching longer, heavier, the decision still suspended between the screen, the cash, and the quiet pressure of everyone watching without looking directly at her. The cashier's finger remained suspended above the final key, unmoving now, as if pressing it would lock something in place that could not be undone, and the register screen held its numbers without flicker this time, steady and indifferent, while Aaliyah's hand lowered slowly back onto the counter, not on the bills, not on the tray, just resting flat for a moment as her fingers spread slightly, then drew in again, a small reset, and she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, subtle. Enough that it barely changed her posture, but enough to release the tension from her shoulders for a second before it returned, quieter, more contained, and the edge of her sleeve brushed against the receipt still in her other hand, the paper making a faint, dry sound as she adjusted her grip, folding it once along a natural crease without looking down, then smoothing it again with the pad of her thumb, slower this time, more deliberate, as if giving herself something to control, and the line behind her did not push forward anymore. It held, a loose stillness replacing the earlier impatience, trays no longer tapping, voices lowering into a soft, distant layer that felt separate from the space around the register, and Ethan did not step back, but he did stop tapping the counter, his fingers now resting still against the surface, his gaze narrowing just slightly as he watched the screen again, then Aaliyah's hand, then the cashier's hesitation, not interrupting, not correcting, just observing more closely than before, his presence no longer expanding the space but settling into it, heavier, quieter, and the cashier glanced once toward the supervisor station across the room, then back to the register, then to Aaliyah, their lips pressing together as if weighing whether to call someone over, but no one moved, no one intervened, and Aaliyah's eyes lifted briefly, not to Ethan, not directly, but to the reflection of the overhead lights on the metal edge of the counter, holding there for a fraction longer than before returning to the screen, her breathing steady but measured, each inhale slightly deeper, each exhale slower, and she reached toward the tray, adjusting its position by less than an inch, aligning it with the scanner again even though it had not shifted, then pulling her hand back halfway before resting it lightly on the edge, her fingers curling under the lip as if anchoring herself, and somewhere behind her a chair scraped faintly across the cafeteria floor, distant but sharp enough to cut through the quiet pocket around them, and the cashier finally exhaled, a small release, their shoulders lowering as they looked down at the keypad again, their finger moving closer to the key but not pressing it yet, and Aaliyah's gaze followed that movement, not quickly, not abruptly, just tracking it with a steady focus, her posture straight but no longer rigid, a slight softening at the edges, as if she had settled into the moment rather than pushing against it, and for a brief second, the space felt suspended between decisions, between outcomes, as if the room itself was waiting to see which way it would tilt. And if you have ever watched a moment stretch like this, where nothing moves but everything shifts, you would recognize how quiet pressure can carry more weight than noise. And Aaliyah did not look away, not from the screen, not from the hand above the keypad, holding her place without stepping forward or back, letting the stillness settle around her without breaking it. The cashier's finger finally moved, pressing a sequence of keys not to finalize the charge but to open a small side menu, and the screen shifted to a detailed breakdown, lines of text replacing the single total, each item listed with a code beside it. And Aaliyah's eyes followed the change immediately, her gaze settling on one line near the middle where a small label blinked faintly. District Meal Plan, verified. The same phrase she had seen earlier but not fully surfaced until now, and she lifted the receipt slightly, aligning it with the screen, the numbers matching exactly, her thumb tracing the printed code once as if confirming it against the display, and she spoke again, steady. That code is already active. Not louder, just clear enough to cut through the quiet, and the cashier leaned in closer, reading the line, then tapping another key to expand it, the system, responding with a confirmation tone, sharper this time, and the total on the screen dropped cleanly to 0. No flicker, no return, just 0, and the register emitted a single, decisive beep, louder than before. Final, and the line behind her shifted again, but this time forward, a small release of held tension as the next tray edged closer, and the cashier exhaled, nodding quickly as they reached for the receipt printer, tearing off a fresh slip and placing it beside Aaliyah's tray. "You are covered," they said, more certain now, their voice returning to its usual rhythm. And Aaliyah slid her tray forward without hesitation, her hand steady as she picked up the new receipt, folding it once before placing it into her bag, her movements controlled, consistent with everything before, and from the side Ethan did not move immediately, his posture holding for a fraction too long, his gaze fixed on the screen where the zero remained, his jaw tightening once before he shifted his weight back, his hand lifting from the counter and dropping to his side, the small, habitual control gone from that gesture. And he looked at the cashier, then at the tray moving past, then back at Aaliyah, his expression unchanged on the surface but his timing off, a half beat behind the flow he usually set, and the student behind her stepped forward fully now, placing their tray down without hesitation, the line resuming its normal pace. And the cashier turned to them without looking back, the system already reset, and Aaliyah moved away from the register, not quickly, not slowly, just at the same measured pace she had maintained all along, the space around her no longer holding still but moving. Again, and Ethan remained near the counter for a second longer before stepping back, clearing the path in a way he had not needed to before, his presence no longer directing the movement but adjusting to it. Aaliyah moved past the register without looking back, the tray balanced evenly in her hands as she stepped into the open space of the cafeteria, the noise returning around her in layers instead of the tight, contained silence from before, and she adjusted her grip once, shifting the milk carton slightly so it would not tip as she walked, her pace steady, unchanged, while behind her the line continued to move, trays sliding forward, voices picking up again, but not quite at the same volume as before, as if something in the rhythm had been interrupted and not fully reset, and Ethan remained near the counter a second longer than necessary, his body angled halfway between stepping away and staying, his eyes tracking the register screen once more even though the number had already cleared, and when the cashier turned to the next student, Ethan did not immediately reclaim the space he had occupied earlier, instead stepping back just enough to let two people pass in front of him, his shoulders tightening slightly as he adjusted the strap of his backpack, the motion sharper than before, less fluid, and one of his friends called out to him from a nearby table, lifting a hand in a casual wave, but Ethan did not respond right away, his attention lingering on the counter area, then shifting toward Aaliyah's direction as she moved further into the room, and when he finally turned, his movement came a fraction too late, the timing off compared to the easy responsiveness he had shown earlier, and he walked toward the table but slowed halfway, pausing near the edge of a chair as another student crossed in front of him, something he would have normally bypassed without hesitation, and he waited, just for a second, then continued, his steps measured, more deliberate, and when he reached the table, he did not immediately sit, instead placing his tray down and standing there, one hand resting on the back of the chair as he looked across the cafeteria, scanning, then stopping briefly on Aaliyah again, his expression controlled but no longer directing the room, and at the register the cashier moved through the next transactions with renewed certainty, pressing keys without hesitation, the beeps returning to their usual pattern, and a student behind the line glanced toward Aaliyah as she passed, then quickly looked away, not with the earlier dismissal but with a brief, uncertain acknowledgement, and Aaliyah reached an empty table near the far side of the room, setting her tray down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table before sitting, her movements consistent, unchanged by what had just happened, and she opened her bag, placing the folded receipt inside without looking at it, then adjusting the zipper halfway before stopping, leaving it slightly open, and across the room Ethan finally sat down, but not in the relaxed sprawl he had held before, his posture more upright, his elbows closer to his body, and when one of his friends spoke to him, he responded, but a beat later than expected, his voice lower, more contained, and he did not look back toward the register again, yet his gaze drifted once more across the room, briefly, before settling on his tray, and the space between them remained, but it had shifted, no longer defined by one direction of control, but by a quiet, visible adjustment that no one addressed out loud, yet everyone seemed to register in the way they moved, paused, and chose where to look. Aaliyah ate slowly, not rushing, not watching anyone, her focus on the tray in front of her as she adjusted the position of her fork between bites, the small movements steady and unchanged, while across the room the rhythm of conversation continued to rebuild in uneven waves, and Ethan sat with his group, but did not lean back the way he had earlier, his shoulders staying forward, his tray barely touched. And when one of his friends laughed and nudged him lightly, he did not match it, his response coming shorter, quieter, his attention drifting again toward the far side of the cafeteria, and after a moment he stood up, not abruptly, just enough to interrupt the flow of his table, lifting his tray with both hands instead of leaving it behind like before, and he walked toward the trash station, stopping once to let a student pass in front of him, a small pause that held longer than necessary, then continued, and when he reached the bins he scraped his tray clean without looking around, stacking it carefully with the others instead of dropping it loosely, his movements controlled but different, and on his way back he passed near Aaliyah's table, not close enough to force interaction, but close enough that the distance between them was no longer defined by avoidance or dominance, and he slowed for a fraction of a second, just enough to shift his path slightly wider, giving her space without drawing attention to it, before continuing forward, his gaze staying ahead this time. And Aaliyah did not look up, her posture unchanged, her presence steady as she finished her meal, while a student at the next table glanced between them, then returned to their own tray, the moment passing without comment, and the cafeteria settled into a quieter, more even rhythm than before, the earlier tension absorbed into the way people moved and chose where to stand, and as Aaliyah stood to leave, she picked up her tray, aligned it once against the table edge, then carried it toward the return station, her steps even, her pace unchanged, and for a brief moment the path ahead of her remained clear without anyone needing to move aside, the space opening naturally as she walked through it. And if this moment stayed with you, share your thoughts, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.